How are there still towns in Texas where $75,000 can buy you a real house? Not a tiny cabin, not a total teardown, a normal-looking family home on a normal street. And how can some of these places sit less than 2 hours from major Texas cities, while their homes cost a fraction of the state average? If the prices are this low, why aren't more people buying? Texas is one of the fastest-growing states in America. Millions of people have moved here, and in much of the state, home prices keep climbing. So why are these towns different? The answer has very little to do with the houses themselves. It has everything to do with the towns around them. Lost industries, shrinking populations, long drives, fewer jobs, and decades of quiet change that most people rarely think about. Today, we're traveling across Texas to uncover the towns where homes still sell for around $75,000, and the real reasons those prices have stayed so low. 1. Pampa, Texas. In most of Texas, $75,000 barely covers a down payment, but in Pampa, it can still buy you an actual house, a front yard, a driveway, a quiet street, the kind of neighborhood where families have lived for generations. So the question isn't whether these homes are cheap. The question is, why are they still cheap? At first glance, Pampa doesn't seem unusual. The streets are clean. The homes are well kept. Kids play basketball in driveways. Pickup trucks sit outside modest brick houses. If nobody told you the prices, you'd probably assume this looked like hundreds of other small Texas towns. Then you see the for sale signs. Around $75,000, sometimes even less. That shouldn't happen in one of America's fastest-growing states. So what's the story? To understand Pampa, you have to go back almost a century. When oil was discovered beneath the Texas Panhandle in the 1920s, the town exploded almost overnight. Thousands of workers arrived, businesses opened, and neighborhoods spread rapidly across the prairie. For a while, it looked like the boom would never end. But eventually, it did. The energy industry changed. Growth slowed. Younger generations increasingly left for larger Texas cities, and while places like Dallas, Austin, and Houston kept attracting new buyers, Pampa quietly settled into a slower pace of life. That's why homes here remain surprisingly affordable. Not because the houses are falling apart, but because the housing boom that transformed much of Texas never fully reached Pampa. And as you'll soon discover, Pampa was only the beginning. 2. Borger, Texas. If Pampa made you question Texas's housing market, Borger makes even less sense. Long before you reach downtown, you'll see them. Smokestacks, miles of pipelines, massive refineries stretching across the horizon. This doesn't look like a town that's struggling. It looks like a town that's still working, which makes the housing market almost impossible to explain. Because despite all of this, you can still find homes selling for around $75,000, with many others priced well below $100,000. So, what's keeping prices so low? Most people assume home prices rise wherever jobs exist. Borger proves that's not always true. For nearly a century, the town has been built around oil refining, petrochemicals, and heavy industry. Those industries are still here, supporting much of the local economy. But one thing never arrived: explosive population growth. While cities like Dallas, Austin, and Houston attracted wave after wave of new residents, Borger remained something very different: a stable working town, not a booming one. And that's a difference the housing market never forgot. Without thousands of new buyers competing for the same homes, prices stayed surprisingly affordable, even as much of Texas became dramatically more expensive. Borger reminds us that cheap housing doesn't always mean a town is failing. Sometimes, it simply means everyone else grew faster. And the next town tells an even more surprising story. 3. Sweetwater, Texas. If Borger proved that industry doesn't always create expensive housing, Sweetwater takes that idea even further. As you drive into town, it's almost impossible to miss them. Wind turbines, hundreds of them, turning across the West Texas landscape in every direction. It looks like the kind of place where money should be pouring in. So why can you still find homes here selling for around $75,000, with many others remaining below $100,000? The answer is surprisingly simple. Investment doesn't always create demand. Over the past 2 decades, wind energy transformed the landscape around Sweetwater. New projects arrived, billions of dollars flowed into the region. But most of that investment wasn't followed by thousands of new families buying homes. Many workers commute. Others move from project to project. And while the wind farms changed the skyline, they never completely changed the housing market. That's what makes Sweetwater so unusual. The economy evolved. The town adapted. But home prices never experienced the explosive growth seen across much of Texas, which reminds us of something we've already seen. A growing industry doesn't automatically create an expensive housing market. Sometimes it simply keeps a small town moving forward, and the next stop proves that, even without a booming industry, affordable homes can still survive. 4. Vernon, Texas. Some towns change with time, others barely seem to change at all. That's the feeling you get in Vernon. Drive through town and you'll see quiet neighborhoods, brick homes, local diners, and tree-lined streets that could have looked exactly the same 20 or 30 years ago. Nothing feels abandoned. Nothing feels broken. Which makes one thing difficult to explain. Homes here can still sell for well under $100,000. So, what kept prices from following the rest of Texas? Unlike cities that experienced wave after wave of new residents, Vernon simply kept moving at its own pace. The town remained a regional center for agriculture, ranching, healthcare, and local services. Life continued. Businesses stayed open. Families stayed. But the housing boom that swept across much of Texas never truly arrived, and sometimes doing nothing is enough to change everything. While other communities competed for thousands of new buyers, Vernon quietly stayed the same. That's why homes here remain surprisingly affordable today, not because the town failed, but because it never felt the pressure that transformed housing markets across the rest of the state. And the next town proves something completely different. Sometimes affordability survives even in places that seem to be doing just fine. 5. Brownwood, Texas. After 4 towns, you might expect affordable places to feel forgotten. Brownwood doesn't. Walk through downtown and you'll find historic storefronts, local cafes, a courthouse square, and neighborhoods that still feel full of life. If anything, Brownwood feels inviting, which makes the housing market surprisingly difficult to explain. Because here, buyers can still find homes priced around $75,000, with many others remaining below $100,000. So why hasn't this town followed the rest of Texas? Unlike many communities we visited, Brownwood never depended on a single industry to survive. Instead, it quietly grew into a regional center for healthcare, education, and local business. The town remained steady, not booming, not collapsing, just steady. And sometimes that's exactly what keeps a housing market affordable. While other cities experienced bidding wars and explosive price growth, Brownwood expanded at a much slower pace. Without thousands of new buyers competing for every home, prices remained surprisingly within reach. Brownwood proves something we've seen again and again throughout this journey. Maybe that's the biggest surprise so far. The most affordable town we visited might also be one of the easiest to picture yourself living in. Sometimes, it simply means a town escaped the frenzy that swept across much of Texas. And the next stop tells an even more unexpected story. 6. Alice, Texas. If you only looked at the streets, you'd probably never guess Alice belongs on this list. There are schools, shopping centers, local restaurants, neighborhoods where families have lived for generations. It feels like a town that's still doing exactly what it was built to do, which makes one thing almost impossible to explain. You can still find homes here selling for around $75,000, with many others comfortably below $100,000. So, what are buyers seeing that most people don't? The answer isn't hidden in the houses, it's hidden on the map. For decades, Alice served as one of South Texas's important commercial centers. But as larger cities continued to expand, more businesses, investment, and new residents naturally gravitated toward places like Corpus Christi and San Antonio. Alice didn't collapse. It simply became less central than it once was. And housing markets notice changes like that. When fewer people compete for the same homes year after year, prices don't rise the way they do in booming cities. That's why Alice remains one of the more affordable housing markets in Texas. Not because life stopped here, but because attention slowly shifted somewhere else. And the final town on our journey proves something even more unexpected. Sometimes, the best opportunity is found in a town that's already finding its way back. 7. Mineral Wells, Texas. After 6 towns, one thing becomes clear. Cheap homes don't all have the same story. Some towns lost industries, others stopped growing. Some were simply overlooked while the rest of Texas surged ahead. Then, there's Mineral Wells. Because unlike almost every town we visited, this one is moving in the opposite direction. Walk through downtown today, and you'll find historic buildings being restored, new cafes opening their doors, visitors returning. For the first time in decades, there's a growing sense of momentum, which makes one question impossible to ignore. If this town is making a comeback, why are homes still so affordable? The answer is timing. A century ago, Mineral Wells was one of Texas's most famous resort towns. Visitors traveled from across the country to experience its mineral springs, grand hotels, and bathhouses. But as travel habits changed, tourism faded, investment slowed, and the town spent decades living in the shadow of its past. Today, that story is beginning to change. New businesses are opening. Historic buildings are finding new life. People are rediscovering what made Mineral Wells special in the first place. But housing markets rarely change overnight. For now, buyers can still find homes at prices that disappeared from much of Texas years ago. And maybe that's the biggest lesson from this entire journey. Affordable homes don't always exist because a town is failing. Sometimes, they exist because the rest of the market simply hasn't caught up yet. After traveling across Texas, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. At first, these towns didn't seem to have much in common. Pampa was built on oil. Borger grew around heavy industry. Sweetwater embraced wind energy. Vernon quietly stood still while the rest of Texas changed. Brownwood remained steady. Alice slowly lost the spotlight. And Mineral Wells is beginning a new chapter. Different histories, different economies, different futures. Yet somehow, they all ended up answering the same question. Why can you still buy a home here for around $75,000? The deeper we looked, the less this became a story about cheap houses. It became a story about time. Some towns grew at exactly the right moment. Others didn't. Some attracted wave after wave of new residents. Others quietly watched that growth happen somewhere else. None of those moments seemed dramatic when they happened. A factory closed. A railroad became less important. A highway bypassed downtown. A new employer chose another city. On their own, they didn't seem like much. But over years, and sometimes decades, they quietly reshaped entire housing markets. That's why these homes still exist. Not because Texas stopped growing, but because growth never reached every town in the same way. And maybe that's the biggest surprise of all. The houses were never really the story. The towns were. So, would you actually want to live in one of these towns? For some people, the answer will probably be no. The jobs may be too limited. The nearest major city may be too far away. Or maybe small town life simply isn't the right fit. But for someone else, these places represent something that's becoming increasingly difficult to find in America. The chance to own a home. Not a luxury home. Not a perfect home. Just a place that's still within reach. Maybe that's the real lesson from this journey. Affordable homes don't always exist because something went terribly wrong. Sometimes, they exist because the rest of the world moved on before these towns ever had the chance to catch up. The next time you pass through a small Texas town and see a for sale sign, you might look at it a little differently. Because sometimes, the cheapest house tells the biggest story.